The United States has sent in what should be some of its heaviest diplomatic firepower into the Middle East, especially into Israel, with the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense variously making various promises and putting pressure on Israel to try and get them to do things that actually enhance American national security. The question is going to be, is it really going to matter? And do we actually have any firepower, despite what the titles of these people are? To try to help make some sense of some of this, we have back Matthew Hoh, former combat Marine, former State Department official, and just an incredible guy all around. Matt, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Danny. Thanks for having me back.
Listen, it just sometimes this stuff is just like you just got to shake your head, even at the even at the opening comments or so. But we got to continue to keep people's feet to the fire and hold them responsible, accountable for what they say, and then what they have said, and then what things actually happen on the ground. And we're going to do that today, no matter what, because as long as they make statements that kind of disconnected from reality, we're going to do our part and expose that deconfliction there. And so I want to take a look. First of all, so Blinken just hours ago, actually, this is all quite fresh, made some comments about some of the situation. And for one of the rare times, actually took a decent, challenging question from the reporter pool, which we'll get to in a second. But I want to start off here, first of all, because he wants to lay out first that Israel has had some significant successes. And I'll just give you a warning here to watch that the Palestinian people get a phrase in this long list of successes. See if you can find it.
October 7th, a year ago, Israel has achieved most of its strategic objectives when it comes to Gaza, all with the idea of making sure that October 7th could never happen again. In the space of a year, it's managed to dismantle Hamas's military capacity. It's destroyed a bunch of its arsenal. It's eliminated its senior leadership, including, most recently, Yahya Sinwar. This has come at the cost, great cost, to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Now is the time to turn those successes into an enduring strategic success. And there are really two things left to do. Get the hostages home and bring the war to an end with an understanding of what will follow. And that's what we've been working on this past day, and we'll continue to work on throughout this trip.
Now, I want to first of all just, I said a phrase. It was a full sentence. I have to admit, given the grammar, it was a full sentence. The price on the Palestinians has been too high. Anyway, moving on, going on to some other stuff. But let's look at the first thing he said there first, that Israel has made significant achievements since October 7th. Do you buy that?
He said this as well in Tel Aviv, that they've achieved, or they've realized many strategic objectives. I mean, I guess it's the perspective of how you want to come into this, right? What lens we want to look at this through, Danny. Certainly, if you're a member of the Israeli political and social movements that want to resettle Gaza, that want to eventually annex the West Bank, absolutely. This has been a tremendous achievement. You've had, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, right? With Naftali Bennett saying this is a once in 50-year opportunity. So in the idea of greater Israel and the idea of expanding and continuing the Zionist project, sure, it's been successful to a degree, right? You're at a point where you're better off now in terms of achieving those aims than you were a year ago or 13 months ago. But in terms of overall, any reasonable or sane or objective look at this from an Israeli perspective, they're in much worse position. They have fully unified this axis of resistance to the point now that, Iran a couple of weeks ago put forward this, basically bill, this idea of formalizing the axis of resistance into a true military alliance, something, akin to like a NATO. So that's just one example. But then the economic costs here, the exhaustion of your army, the fact, again, that you have really made Israel into a pariah state throughout the world. The world's opinion is against you, with the exception of the American government, the British government, and a handful of others. All these other nations are still trading with Israel, but they're heading in the wrong direction. This is all trending the wrong way for Israel. If again you look at this in any sense of trying to achieve true security and true stability for the Israeli state and its people. So, you got to, which set of glasses are we putting on here in order to look at it? Are we looking at it from Netanyahu and his governing coalition, particularly the extremists, even though they're not so extreme in terms of relative to the rest of Israeli politics, like Ben Gvir and Smotrich? Certainly this has been successful. This has kept Benjamin Netanyahu out of jail, for example, right? If this didn't occur, it's very possible his government might have been brought down and he would have stood charges, trial for corruption, and he could be sitting in prison right now.
I want to look at that also from a perspective. So, and related to that headline that Gary's showing right there about Netanyahu pledged no permanent Israeli presence in Gaza. Okay, so that's what he's saying with his mouth when the Secretary of State is there. But what Blinken said at the first of that soundbite there, that the objective that Israel had set was that October 7th could never happen again. Now, you said that depending on which lens you look through, if you look through the lens of some in Israel that they want to depopulate Gaza, then yeah, those things are in the right direction, because you will physically remove all the people who could become against you, which led to October 7th because of how they were treated in the decades before. But if you're not going to get them out of there, is anything that has happened so far going to make future October 7ths unlikely?
No, it's going to make it much more likely. You're telling me that there's not going to be a desire for vengeance, a desire for revenge, a desire for justice to set things right from the people of Palestine? I was thinking today, Dan, we have films and TV shows and books about, Nazi hunters, about people who, Jews who after World War II went out and found the men who perpetrated the Holocaust. And here you have this and there's been books and television shows and movies that have celebrated that, and rightly so, right? And certainly, say like the arrest and trial of Adolf Eichmann. Like those types of things were real measures of justice being done in this world. This is something that this genocide will have a parallel to. So you have that, but then you just have the base actual level of this, the reality of that. You still have an occupation. You still have a people who have been oppressed. You still have a people who have been humiliated. And now you have this genocide enacted against them, this destruction of their whole society, of their whole, trying to erase them from history, essentially. There are going to be reactions to that. And it may not be the day after this is all over, if and when it's ever over. That's a whole other conversation to talk about. But at some point, you have to expect that there will be a response to this. But even if you just take that away, say the Israeli response after October 7th had been more measured, right? Had been more modest. You still were not getting at the actual causes of October 7th. Why did October 7th occur? And it's because you have this occupation. It's because you have this history for decades of a brutalization, a subjugation, a humiliation of a people. You have a desire for liberation, a desire to have their own free state. And until those grievances are met, then you will have violent resistance to the occupation, violent resistance to the apartheid. And so by enacting a genocide on top of these people, why does anyone think that's going to make Israel any more secure or any more stable? And we're just talking about the Palestinians here, right? We're not talking about the Lebanese, the Syrians, the Iraqis, the Yemenis, and certainly the Iranians. So, Netanyahu himself, we've talked about this, right? When he says we're in a seven front war, he is correct. They are in a seven front war. How anyone can say Israel has achieved its strategic objectives from a year ago by making an October 7th attack likely when they're in a seven front war.
Yeah.
They need
really good point.
Yeah, it really is. It's but that's just propaganda, and that's all that someone like Tony Blinken has to offer is propaganda. I mean, I think Blinken and others, they see the barn door. They see the elections coming 2 months from now. They're going to be out, and they're just trying to get through this. But I mean, it really is remarkable how easily and how enthusiastically these men and women in the U.S. government lie for something, just defying reality.
I want to touch on something before we move on to the next portion of that press conference, which I think is important. It's something you just said reminded me of something I've read here recently, and that is that people will be hunting down, people who've been doing these atrocities. Well, it's been going. Let me show you something on the screen here. It hasn't gotten a lot of notoriety in the West, but I assure you it has elsewhere. And that Israeli soldiers have been TikToking all kinds of potential war crimes against Gaza. This is talking about an Al Jazeera documentary, which I have not actually seen this one. But I have seen some others recently that have been taking a look at this phenomenon. And the very interesting thing about it was one of the guys who was interviewing some of the soldiers who were in some of these TikToks. It was very interesting because you're thinking, like I remember from our time on active duty in some of these war zones that there were some Americans who did some similar things. And you may remember there's some that posed with some dead Taliban, and it was just a huge deal, blew up. Those guys were punished, etc. In this case, the guy told the interviewer, all the videos have to be approved. So every one of these videos you're seeing is approved for release. Far from what we did where the soldiers were punished, they're being encouraged to do this. Right. And I just got to think, Matt, that every one of these TikTok videos is being cataloged somewhere. And these guys who are bragging about it and smiling very broadly on the cameras, one day probably won't be smiling.
That's exactly right. I mean, and there has been, I'm blanking on the name of the organization that has done this, but they have presented this to the International Criminal Court. At least 1,000 names of Israeli soldiers who have been identified in these various social media videos. Yeah, 1,000. And there's many more to be done. I mean, the extent of this is, my understanding, what I've heard is they're competing with each other with these videos. Who can show the better video? Who could have the more extreme video? Who could show the more dead bodies in a video? That there are Israeli soldiers who are putting these videos and these types of photos on their dating profiles, right? I mean, so the celebration of this within Israel is something that I don't think we really truly understand in the West. Just the cult of death that is surrounding Israeli society right now, with how excited these people are about this ethnic cleansing, about this genocide. It makes sense because this is how the society has been conditioned for decades. This is the way generations of Israelis have been brought up to believe that this type of massacre, this desolation of the Palestinian people is what's just, it's what's needed, it's what's divine, right? I mean, all those things. So the reality is that they are, as you said, Danny, putting their own names next to their actions in a way that we've never seen before. I mean, you always had in war, particularly in the photographic age, people would pose next to dead bodies and things like that, but that was minuscule in the amount compared to now, where again, it seems as if these Israeli soldiers are competing with one another to one-up one another in terms of the videos and photos they post. And yeah, and exactly, Al Jazeera has been doing a really great job of documenting this, of showing this. I just saw one about a combat engineer unit, and I was a combat engineer, so a bit of a connection there, but of just how grotesque and how evil, if you will, the joy that these men had in destroying Palestinian society, in destroying, and killing. It just the joy that they had in it comes through these videos.
Yeah, and one of the things that they were saying in there is that the intention is to dehumanize the Palestinians and to humiliate them, and they're openly okay with it, which speaks to a deeper societal, serious issue that renders things like the next part we're going to see here from Blinken all the more, I guess, embarrassing might not be the right word, but unrealistic, I guess. So Blinken was actually asked by Andrea Mitchell a fairly hard question, and I give her credit for at least bringing this up. Watch the display.
Independent experts like Cindy McCain of the World Food Program say it is a disaster, that children are malnourished with lifelong health effects, those who are not already starving. The population is being decimated. The attacks continue, contrary to what you said about Israel having accomplished its initial goals. And according to these experts, Israel is blocking aid from getting in with unreasonable searches at the border and other obstacles so that the food is not getting to the people who desperately need it. You said there's been progress. What evidence do you have of that? And what more still needs to be done?
So, Andrea, this is exactly why we're so intensely focused on this issue. It's why Secretary Austin and I wrote to our counterparts here in Israel. It's why we insisted that they take concrete, specific actions to improve the situation, to enable food not only to get to Gaza, and there are trucks getting to Gaza. A big part of the challenge is once they're there, it's moving them around within Gaza. There are a lot of challenges that go along with that, including lawlessness, including looting, but Israel has to maximize everything it has under its control in order to get the food in.
Notice what he says there toward the end. He still wants to throw another dig at the Palestinian people by saying, of course, one of the problems is the looting and the lawlessness. Yeah, what do you think is going to happen when you've decimated, absolutely obliterated the entire physical infrastructure of the Gaza Strip so that the trucks in many places can't even drive any place because the roads have been destroyed and the people are literally starving to death. And so when food does come up, naturally, it's going to be chaotic, especially when any kind of the police have been killed long ago that could bring peace to the area within the Strip. But I digress.
And the police were deliberately killed for that reason. Early in this, like in the first months, the Israelis were targeting the police directly and deliberately in order to achieve this aim, so that there was no one there to manage this, no one there to protect these food shipments. And then when you've had a people who've been starving for, as you said, Danny, for a year, what do you expect's going to happen? Yeah, I mean, so just the you know, it's like it's like we're trying to deal with someone who's insisting that the sun is the moon or that the sky is red. You know, I mean, like it's just we're dealing with people who just will not speak in any way with any degree of integrity, any degree of honesty. These are mendacious psychopaths who have been cynical and calculating this entire time. Attempting to achieve a political end here in the U.S. of remaining in the good graces of the Israel lobby for those domestic political benefits, as well as because they also, too, believe in an Israel first policy for the United States. And so they will lie, they will disassemble, they will calculate however they need to continue to adhere to those, to that narrative, to the needs of that narrative.
Now, right, what's going on concurrent with while he's on the tarmac, while he's talking about these things, Israel is openly in a position, in an operation right now to, quote, clear out the northern part of Gaza. They claim that they're going to drive all the people out, and then later on they will vet the people coming back so that they can eliminate all the Hamas and continue going down the Strip like that. But then we see, simultaneous to that, people like Daniela Weiss, who's been the subject of a number of documentaries of recent days. And this was in the news earlier today, where this big smiling face she has on here says that the Palestinians will disappear from Gaza. And this was at a meeting of the Likud party, which was attended. This meeting that she was at was attended by Ben-Gvir. This is from Netanyahu's Likud party. And her quote was, "We came here with one clear purpose. The purpose is to not settle the entire issue in the Gaza Strip, not just part of it, not just a few settlements, the entire Gaza Strip from north to south. They want to get rid of all the people that are there right now." I mean, this is literally, and some have openly said this of recent days, Matt, that they said the Nakba was the beginning in 1948, and now then they want to complete the task here. Right. These are not fringe people. These are not on the edge. This is in mainstream society right now, and it's not being condemned. What do you make of it?
Well, it's interesting, too, that you use the word fringe, because that's the word that keeps popping up in American media to try and diminish the importance of this. I just saw in the Wall Street Journal again, this use of the word fringe, that this is a fringe idea to resettle Gaza by the Israelis, to move everyone out, to ethnically cleanse. It's a fringe idea. It has popular support in Israel. Over half of Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet's in favor of this. The other half just hasn't fully, spoken it out loud. Over the weekend or in the last couple of days, Tony Blinken, when he was in Israel, asked for Netanyahu to say it, out loud that these types of things won't occur. They won't do that. I mean, in terms of what we're witnessing is, like you just said, it's the culmination of what began 80 years ago. And it's not fringe. One of the things I was corrected over the weekend, Danny, was I was under the assumption that you had some in Israeli politics who would, if they were to gain power, would essentially reset things back to October 6th, that they would pull out of Gaza and that essentially wall the Palestinians off and go back to October 6th. It'd still be terrible. It'd still be awful, but it would not be what we've seen this last year. Excuse me, that I was completely corrected on that. My understanding, as it was explained, is that there is nobody of any significance in Israeli politics who believes any such thing. And that particularly we saw this with Benny Gantz after Yahya Sinwar was killed, where Gantz said the war will go on. This is not a pivotal moment where we can now end the war. No, the war will go on. We will achieve what we need to achieve. So the idea is basically within Israeli politics, a reflection of Israeli society, there are two poles here, right? One, the most moderate, if you want to call it that, is military occupation of Gaza, and then leading up to this full resettlement of Gaza. And that seems to be the two options. And what will happen that is coming will be somewhere in between just a simple military occupation of Gaza to the full ethnic cleansing and settlement of Gaza. Somewhere in between is what the Israelis will be able to accomplish and achieve. And so when you look at it in that way, there are no moderate positions. This idea that this is a culmination of the Nakba 80 years ago is exactly correct. And you've seen this too. You've had Haaretz a week or two ago, had a number of Israeli soldiers who've been in North Gaza or who currently are in North Gaza saying to Haaretz that, look, the cleansing has started. This is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. So, it's clear that any Palestinians in North Gaza who are moved south below the Netzarim corridor, where that's basically the giant road that Israel created about 2/3 of the way north of the Gaza Strip, or no, 2/3 of the way up the Gaza Strip. Any Palestinians that pass below that, move south below that, it's clear they are never going back north again. And so you're seeing reports coming out of North Gaza of the defiance of the Palestinians. We will choose death over losing our homes.
Well, yeah, and that just kind of gets into the next point here, because you see physically it's taking place as we speak on the ground right now, despite Blinken's presence there in Israel today, that they are physically starting to depopulate the north right now. And then Blinken was further asked about that, well, what about the reoccupation of Gaza? Forget about the ethnic cleansing. He was even saying that no on the reoccupation.
We reject any Israeli reoccupation of Gaza. I said so in Tokyo a year ago. It's been U.S. policy. It will remain U.S. policy. And it's also, to the best of my understanding, the policy of the Israeli government. That's what I heard from the Prime Minister, who is the authoritative word on these things. So whatever they say, whether it's retired generals or some members of the government, that is not the policy of the government, and it is certainly not the policy of the United States.
So I found it interesting there that he claims that people like Daniela Weiss, well, they can say whatever they want. They're not the government, etc. But then in that headline that Gary showed toward the top of the hour here, that Blinken said those things to Netanyahu, and he, quote, demurred. He's right. Like, yeah, about that. But listen, looking back now, more than a year after this had started, do you see any evidence that anyone in the United States government has the backbone or the leadership ability to tell Israel anything about what it's going to do while we give them everything they ask for?
No, absolutely not. Now we're in this transition phase where, again, like I said, Blinken and Sullivan and Biden and others, they see the barn door. Their time's coming to an end. So they can say these types of statements, and they can say the Israelis told us this, And then over the next couple of months, well, we're in a transition. We really can't change policy because the incoming administration really is the one that should be setting the policy. So they're making themselves unaccountable at this point. And then at some point in their memoirs, Tony Blinken will say, I can't believe Netanyahu lied to me. You know, we trusted the Israelis and they lied to us. So you can see how they're just clearly establishing their alibis, clearly establishing their case for them to be held unaccountable. They will say, well, look, we had this deal with the Israelis. And, you know, after the election, the Israelis said they were going to do this. And then we had to turn that over to the new administration. This is not on us. You know, you see this all the time with Matt Miller at the State Department claiming like, look, it's because of us that food trucks are getting into Israel. Just like these absolute crackpot, upside down Orwellian falsities that they get away with over and over and over again. And I got to imagine at some level, these men like Blinken and Sullivan and others have to be feeling some relief that the end is coming for them, that they don't have to continue this. Maybe they don't, because I was saying earlier, these are psychopaths. These are all they know is the cynical calculations for their own gain. So maybe they don't, but you can clearly see what's being set up there here, Danny, is their excuses, their alibis, their ability to be held unaccountable by history, which is not what's going to occur. They will be held accountable by history. But, you know, they also know, too, that they have to stay within the good graces of the Israel lobby. They have to stay within the good graces of the military industrial complex, the weapons companies, because that's where their own future lies. When Tony Blinken leaves office, he will go back to West Exec Advisors, which was the consulting firm, the lobbying firm that he set up, that really not a consulting firm as much as it's an access firm or a patronage firm. But he will go back to West Exec Advisors, and he will make a ton of money connecting Raytheon to the senator of such and such. I mean, like, this will be his role. And so he's got to stay within their good graces to a degree. And that's why you won't see, even if they wanted to, you won't see in these last 2 months where they have the opportunity, because a new administration is coming in, to actually try and do something against the Israelis, to actually take a firmer stance against the Israeli government, or to maybe just not lie. They won't do that because they're still calculating. They're still seeing their futures. Tony Blinken needs to make sure that West Exec Advisors is as successful after this administration as it was before this administration. So, yeah, I mean, you just see how the structure of all this, even as we hope that these people do face justice, that they are held accountable, that they're hunted down, if you will, we know the reality is that they are going back to their old jobs and they're going to make a ton of money. And that person there, as Gary is scrolling, thank you, Gary, Michelle Flournoy, who co-founded West Exec Advisors with Tony Blinken. She is likely to be the next Secretary of Defense. Flournoy's most recent position in the U.S. government was the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy in the Obama administration, and so
where she lied like a dog about the Afghan war and
the Syrian war and the Libyan war. Those were all
go down the list.
Those are all her brainchilds, and this is the person who will be promoted after Afghanistan, after Syria, after Libya. She was a big fan of the Iraq War as well, to a degree, not as prominent, of course, but certainly she co-founded the Center for New American Security, which is a Democratic Party version of the Institute for Study of War. This is what happens: is she's going to be promoted to be Secretary of Defense unless there's some type of scandal, and she'll be celebrated because she'll be the first woman Secretary of Defense.
Yep,
and none of
that's good.
Failures will actually be
and I don't know if he's actually part of it, but apparently he's trying to be, and that is the Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, who gave his own version.
The numbers of civilian casualties have been far too high. We'd like to see Israel scale back on some of the strikes that it's taking, especially in and around Beirut. And we'd like to see things transition to some sort of negotiation that would allow civilians on both sides of the border to return to their homes. That's the point that I'll continue to make with Minister Gallant. And I think, yes, he does take on my input.
You know, what's so striking to that is that this is supposed to be the Secretary of Defense of the United States of America, one of the most powerful positions on the planet. And he is talking there like his, I don't know, like the kid on the playground that gets picked last for all the sports. He's like, well, I really hope that maybe my parents' money could get me on the team next year. But I mean, he said, the captain said he's listening to me. You know what I mean? If the whole thing is coming across as just really weak, and then he's hoping that Gallant kind of listens to him, when we see on the ground that they do everything they want to do, and they listen to us almost none.
Yeah, it is. It's the way that these men and women in positions of power in the United States have been so humbled by the Israelis here, have been so degraded and embarrassed. If they had an ability to be embarrassed, maybe they don't. You know, we're talking about where Blinken will go. We're talking about Flournoy. Well, Blinken and Austin had a relationship before this, of course, before this administration, and they were involved in an outfit called Pine Island Capital Advisors. It's a private equity, venture capital investment firm. The people who've been following the military industrial complex know in the last several years that private equity and private investment have become a much bigger part of the military industrial complex than previously. And so, you know, and also too famously, Lloyd Austin was on the board of directors for Raytheon. These are the things that he will go back to. So these people's futures are secure as long as they don't do anything to jeopardize the profits of the organizations and institutions to which they're returning to. But the fact that they're so willing to debase themselves, like the way you said, this man is a Secretary of Defense. This man was a 4-star general. This man was the commanding general of Central Command. This man led troops in war over and over again. And he's willing to be treated like this so openly and brazenly by a foreign power. For what purposes? To ensure that he gets that board seat back at Raytheon, that maybe he gets some other board seats, to ensure that Pine Island Capital has first access into various government programs and, you know, et cetera. Is that what this is about? Or, you know, I mean, because with Blinken, someone who has always been a political person, who's always been a political animal, who's always been part of politics, even though he never ran for office himself, he's part of the political machine. Austin was a career general. And now, of course, yes, Danny, we know, particularly getting that 3 or 4 star rank, you have to be a politician. Yeah. But there had to have been some backbone. There had to have been some integrity in him. But then again, you look at Petraeus, you look at Allen, you look at all these other generals from our time, from our generation. And it's no surprise that someone like Austin would be so easily humbled, easily controlled by a foreign power, as we're seeing done here.
Always remind you to like and subscribe, and we will see you on our next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive. But also to remember, we have an Apple Podcast, Spotify, Podcast Addict. Type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive, because I know you can't always watch the videos, but we don't want you to miss a single episode. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next episode tomorrow.